Yeah, so then maybe we can start, or yeah. So before we start, maybe good to generate correct motivation, as being very important in any form of Buddhist practice, so to say, or study. So I think we're here today for a particular purpose, and that is for the purpose of understanding emptiness and dependent origination, and why, in order to eliminate ignorance, progressing on the stage of the path to enlightenment, and to help others to eliminate their kind of emotions, afflictions, and rooted in ignorance. So try to generate motivation in order to understand emptiness for the purpose of eliminating suffering for self and others. So yeah, generate correct motivation for yourself. And then imagine Sakyamuni Buddha in front, surrounded by the masters of India and Tibet in particular, the Nalanda tradition, and then surrounding yourself countless sentient beings undergoing individual sufferings, and think it's your responsibility to do something for them, and then you start taking responsibility to lead them in reciting the prayers. To the founder, the transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, full awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sagata know the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from the Sakya clan, and prostrate me go for refuge. To the founder, down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, full awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sagata know the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from the Sakya clan, and prostrate me go for refuge. To the founder, down transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the complete, perfect, full awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, Sagata know the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the complete, fully awakened one, the down transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, subdue from the Sakya clan, and prostrate me go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you are born in this earth, you played out the 7 strides, and then supreme in this world. To you, O wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, formed supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, reigner of the best, Lord, to you prostrate. With supreme signs, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you prostrate. Thus 3 like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you are prostrate. The saving having great compassion, the founding having all understanding, and filled with merit, causes like a vast ocean, to you the one counterdoubtness are prostrate. The purity that frees from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies are prostrate. Those who are liberated and show the path to liberation, the only feel qualified realizations, or moral precepts, to you, sublime community tending virtue, are prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devote homage. To all worldly of respect, bound with bodies, as many realms and all ends in all respects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. The star of his liberation, a flame of a lamp, an illusion or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning and cloud, see conditioned things as such. To this merits may all sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the full faults, and be delivered from the star ocean, perturbed by the waves, aging, sickness, and death. I prostrate to Arya triple gem. Thus I heard at one time that Bhagavan was dwelling in the Mars Virgis mountain in Rajgir together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the miraculous phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound affection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty in nature. Then, to the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, how should any son of the lineage wish to train to practice activities of profound affection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice activities of profound affection of wisdom should look upon it like this. correctly and repeating Behong those 5 aggregates, also as empty nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, empty is not other than form, and form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, and composition of factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, and not filled, and not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, emptiness there's no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomenon. There is no element up to including no mind element, and no mental conscious element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, no extinction, aging, and death. Similarly, there's no suffering, origination, cessation, and part. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas will lie and dwell in perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. And all the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly completely awakened to unspread, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to an equal, the mantra truly pacified all suffering, should be known as truth since not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata, Gata Gata, Paragata, Parasamkata, Bodhi, Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, his father, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you indicated, and even the goddess rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, his father, and those surrounding their entirety, along with the worlds of gods and humans, was overjoyed and highly spoken praised by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of the Dakinis and the 3 chakras who abide of the holy Yoda using space. By the power of clairvoyance and magic illumination, look at a practitioner like a mother for a child. Akasamarasasana samaraya. Akasamarasana samarayapi, tayata, gata gata, parasamgata bodhi. So, by the teachings of the 3 sublime jewels presenting the power of truth, may in and out in this be transformed, may it be dispelled, and may it be pacified. May all negative force opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified, and may the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. And may we separate from problems half conditioned to the Dharma, and may all enjoyments be corners to the Dharma, and may there be auspicious and perfect happiness here and right now. The foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure Guru. Correctly devoting to the Guru is the root of the path. By clearly seeing this and applying great effort, please bless me to rely upon the Guru with great respect. Understanding the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once. It's greatly meaningful and difficult to find again. Please bless me to generate a mind that unceasingly day and night takes its essence. This life is as permanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just like the shadow follows the body, the reasons of black and white karma follow. Finding firm and definite conviction in this, please bless me always to be careful, to abandon even the slightest negativities and accomplish all virtuous deeds. Seeking samsaric pleasures is a door to all suffering. They are uncertain, cannot be relied upon. Recognize these shortcomings, please bless me to generate a strong wish for the bliss of liberation. Led by this pure thought, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teaching is keeping the prajnamoksha vows. Please bless me to accomplish this essential practice. Just as I have fallen into the sea of samsara, so have all modern migratory beings. Please bless me to see this, train in supreme bodhicitta, and bear the responsibility of free migratory beings. Even if I develop only bodhicitta, but do not practice the 3 types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment. With my clear recognition of this, please bless me to practice the bodhisattva vows with great energy. Once I pacify distraction to wrong objects and correctly analyze the meaning of reality, please bless me to generate quickly in my mind stream the unified path of calm abiding, special insight. Having become a pure vessel by training in the general path, please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones, the supreme Vajra vehicle. At that time, the basis of accomplishing the 2 attainments is keeping pure vows and samayam. As I become firmly convinced of this, please bless me to protect these vows and pledge like my life. Then, having realized the importance of the 2 stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with great energy, never giving up the 4 sessions, please bless me to realize the teachings of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the Gurus who show the noble paths and spiritual friends who practice of long lives, please bless me to pass away completely all out in indignities. And all my lives, never separate from perfect Gurus, may enjoy the magnificent Dharma, leading current stages and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajra Dara. Yeah, so then we take refuge. Sangye Chedan Sogni Sonam La Janjo Badu Dani Gyasu Dagi Chisha Give Sama Dola Penje Sangye Dobajo Sangye Chedan Sogni Sonam Janjo Badu Dani Gyasu Dagi Chisha Give Sama Dola Penje Sangye Dobajo Sangye Chedan Sogni Janjo Bado Dani Kyazo Chi Daki Chuje Gibe Sonam Dola Penche Sangye Doba Sho. Yeah, so to start with a quotation from Arya Nagarjuna, very similar to the first verse of the text we go over. And there it says that, moved out of compassion, you who eliminate wrong views, you teacher of the sublime Dharma, to Gautam Buddha I pay homage. So moved out of compassion is the motivation, right? You could say that the Buddha is moved out of compassion, having, of course, initially generated great compassion, love and kindness, bodhicitta, entered the paths of the bodhisattva yana, and then eventually achieved the state of enlightenment. So that means that the Buddha, of course, has spontaneous bodhicitta, spontaneous great compassion, and whatever the Buddha does is for that purpose. Yeah, the Buddha doesn't make a distinction between friends, enemies, or strangers, or distinction between those who are close at distance, as we say, or the Buddha doesn't make a distinction between those who benefit or harm the Buddha. Why? Because all beings want happiness and don't want suffering. So for that purpose, the Buddha taught the teachings, for the purpose of eliminating suffering, so to say. So that's the first line, right? You moved out of compassion. You will eliminate wrong views. So there's various forms of wrong views, as we know. But here specifically, traditional explanation is then, of course, is the wrong view of ignorance. The ignorance being the root of samsara. The ignorance of grasping at an inherent I and mine, so to say. And that means whenever there's a strong affliction that arises, if it's anger or strong desire or jealousy or pride, or even more modern kind of afflictions like anxiety, fear, or depression, it's often related with the sense of a self, and not just a sense of a self that seems to exist from its own side, a self that seems to exist without dependence, an I. When you get angry, this time you say something like, "Why? How dare this person say this to me? I am not like that." Or when there's strong desires, you want this or you want that. I need this, I need that. So it's all related with the self, and not just any form of a self that seems to exist from its own side. So it seems to exist from its own side. That means it appears in that way, but that is not really the reality. So the way things appear to our mind is not always reality, and we know that. So here, in a similar way, that the I appears in a very solid, independent, unitary or singular aspect. The self appears in that way. So it's very important to recognize how the self actually appears in order to be able to realize the opposite of it, or to refute the self, right? So it's very important to get a clear picture how the I appears, and it is true with strong afflictions like anger or strong desires or jealousy or pride, or when you're close to death, or when you're almost dying, or you imagine you fall off a building, or you fall off a ship in the middle of the ocean and you're lost all by yourself, or there's a big storm or a hurricane and it's approaching and there's not much time left and you're just enclosed in your room, but destruction will come in a few minutes. So then you get a very strong sense of the self you want to protect. So that strong self you want to protect, the question is, does it exist the way it appears? That's a very big question. Yeah. The way it appears causes a lot of problems. The way it appears causes us to have fear. The way it appears causes us to generate strong afflictions. But does it actually exist the way it appears? Yeah? So it's very funny that something we actually believe since beginner's lifetime is not really a reality, but actually causes all the suffering and samsara. Right? So you're very fortunate to be able to be here today, because most people, they're not interested in these things. Right? So, and that's understandable. Why? Because since beginner's lifetime, we take it for granted that it exists the way it appears. Yeah. So there's only very few people who come to the conclusion that that's not a reality. And even often I mention David Bohm, who is kind of a physicist in the field of quantum mechanics. He comes to similar conclusions, right? He says this self-deceptive thought, or self-identity, as he calls it, is a cause for many problems in society, of making distinction between us and them, and wanting security, and wanting power, and discrimination. You know, so. But then he continues and says, is a problem, this self-deceptive thought, or the self-identity, is kind of a problem for many aspects in society and on a personal level. But actually, he says, it's not really there. It's just a show. And it's a very convincing show, and that's why people believe it's a reality, or that's why people take it as an apparent reality, as he says. You know, so it's a very interesting point coming from a physicist in the field of quantum mechanics, who of course was influenced by Krishnamurti, but still, you know, he proves his kind of theory on mathematics, right? And then he comes to similar conclusions that nothing exists out there the way it appears. Nothing exists that's solid. Yeah? So matter, in the same way as we examine in quantum mechanics and particular quantum gravity, doesn't really exist the way it appears. Yeah, if you engage in dialogues with people in the field of quantum mechanics, in particular quantum gravity, like Carlo Rovelli, for example, you come to the same kind of conclusions that Carlo Rovelli also said once to me. He said, you know, the matter that appears outside it sounds and seems very solid, but actually it's not. It's very similar to consciousness. He said, when we made a distinction between matter and consciousness, right? So that means that the properties of matter are very similar, although they appear very solid out there, you know. So that's also what Arya Nagarjuna came to the conclusion, about a little bit over 2,000 years ago, based on the Buddhist teaching, right? So that going back to this quotation, right? So you moved out of compassion, you eliminate wrong views. Yeah. So the wrong views of misunderstanding reality, and then because of those wrong views, we generate all these kind of afflictions. Yeah. You eliminate wrong views. You teacher of the sublime Dharma. Then Arya Nagarjuna actually explains what the Buddha is teaching. Not any teaching, but he doesn't praise any teaching, but he praises the teaching on sublime Dharma, which is a teaching on dependent origination. Yeah, dependent origination is proving that things do not exist from their own side. Yeah, that because everything is interdependent, that means nothing exists without dependence. Everything is always depending on something else than itself. So nothing can be intrinsic. Nothing can exist in an intrinsic way. Everything is always depending on something else than itself. And that's very similar. That's probably why Carlo Rovelli also likes Nagarjuna so much, because when Carlo Rovelli in his book Helgoland, for example, he even praises Nagarjuna and says he read a lot of forms of philosophy, but never found such a profound aspect of philosophy as Arya Nagarjuna, because in Arya Nagarjuna, forms of philosophy is actually just a commentary on the Buddhist teachings, that nothing exists from its own side. Even emptiness itself is empty of inherent existence. Right? So that's kind of quite an interesting aspect of philosophy. Okay, so you move out of compassion, you eliminate wrong views, you teacher of the sublime Dharma, to Gautam Buddha I pay homage. So that's a very interesting paying of homage, not because of the Buddha's incredible qualities of his body or his speech or his mind. No. qualities of particular teachings, and well, the teachings of dependent origination. Because the teachings of dependent origination helps us to understand emptiness. Yeah? So dependent origination and emptiness you could see as two sides of a coin. Yeah, that because there everything is dependent, that means everything is empty, and empty doesn't mean nothingness. Empty here, emptiness means empty of something, right? So empty of what? Empty of inherent existence. Yeah, we also have to have an empty of something, and we just talked about the need to understand how the I appears. Yeah, how the self actually appears before able to refute it. In a similar way, if you talk about the absence of an elephant, then if you don't know how an elephant looks like, you cannot really talk about the absence of an elephant. Yeah. So in a similar way, without recognizing how the I appears, you cannot really talk about the emptiness of that self. Yeah. So that's kind of the first step of the homework that should be done if you read the inside sections in the Lamrim text. Then the first point of the four points of analyzing emptiness is recognizing the object of refutation, or recognizing the object of that has to be refuted, right? So that's the first step. You know, that we have to have a clear picture, and then by the power of seeing that everything is a nature of dependence, we come to the conclusion that nothing exists in the way it appears. So that's true for the self, and it's true for all phenomena around us. Yeah, that initially it's easier to realize the selfness of a person than it is to realize the selfness of phenomena. So there's a few reasons for that, because it appears clearer, that the self appears clearer to your mind, and to see the self appearing to your mind, and you know that the person is basically imputed, what we call a person, what you call your own name, then that's just an imputation based on the mere collection of your body and your mind, right? But if you have the mere collection of your body and your mind, and you label your own name on it, or you impute your own name on top of that, and that's the reality. But then we have a superimposition on top of that, or we put something on top, saying that believing there is an I and mine there on top of the mere collection. Yeah, so that's kind of a very important aspect, what we call the view of the transitory collection. That's a very important aspect to be understood in the Lamrim and in any meditation on emptiness. That what is this view of the transitory collection is a collection, right? So what kind of collection is it? It's a collection of your body and your mind. Yeah, we have a body, we have a mind. Yeah, and that collection of those two, they exist. There's a body, there's a mind. Yeah. So then, but what happens? We look upon, or as we technically say, the object of observation exists, meaning the body and mind exists. You observe the body and the mind, and then you think there's something on top of that. You think not it's merely imputed, you think there is an I, or you think there is a mind. And so that's the view of the view of the transitory collection, means the collection of your body and mind, which is transitory, is momentary changing. Your body is momentary changing, your mind is momentary changing. So those two aspects exist, but then we see there's something on top of that. We over impute or superimpose, as we say, kind of an identity of a self. And that identity of the self is often described as I and mine, having two aspects. I is kind of the person or the self itself, of the self of a person, and the mine is a kind of possessive particle that refers to the self of phenomena. Yeah, there's my mobile phone, my house, my car, right? My computer. So, and we see, because we see the self as I existing in an inherent or intrinsic way, all by itself, in a similar way, we see my phone and my computer, my house, we see also very, very intrinsic. That's the way it appears. Yeah. So the view of the transitory collection is actually a view that the mind views a particular reality in a particular way. Yeah. So the mere collection of your body and your mind exists, and it looks upon that mere collection of this momentary or transitory the body and the mind, and then superimposes or puts something on top of that. And then you think, oh, there's an I there, and there's a mind there. So that's what we call the view of the transitory collection, so to say, which is, according to Chandakirti and many other masters, more or less the root of samsara, right? So that's quite clear that the view of the transitory collection is the root of samsara. So then you start to understand, if you want to get rid of the root of samsara, you have to understand what is reality and what is not. So that means this I that appears and this mind that appears in a very intrinsic way, appears in a way without dependence. And because of that, we get angry. Because of that, we get strong desires. Because of that, all kind of other destructive emotions arise. So the clue is to realize that the I and the mind aspect do not exist the way it appears. So it appears in a particular way. We think it exists the way it appears, and that's a problem. So we should use various reasons, and in particular, the reason of dependent origination, because we say transitory collection. That means your body and your mind are in the nature of dependence, right? Because of that dependence between your body and your mind, and even within your mind, there is various moments of consciousness and various types of consciousness. We have sensory perceptions, we have mental consciousness, we have mental factors, we have past, present, and future moments, we have more coarser forms of mind, more subtler forms of mind. So in that whole kind of process, that complex kind of program, you could say, of what we call consciousness, there is no place for something to exist without dependence. There's no place for an I to exist in an intrinsic kind of inherent way. And that's also true for our body. Our body is made out of various parts of bones and organs and muscles and veins, and over time it changes. Every day there's about 50 billion cells that change in your body. It doesn't appear like that, but that's the reality. So also in this momentary changing body, this transcendental body, you cannot really find a kind of solid entity we call a self or an I that seems to appear in a very intrinsic kind of inherent way. So that's kind of an aspect that Arya Nagarjuna then addresses and says, you have to realize by the power of dependent origination to see the correlation of the various moments of the body, of the various moments of consciousness, of the various parts within the body, of the various aspects within the mind, that there is no place for an intrinsic kind of from its own side existing I and mine in your body or in your mind. So by the power of the reason of dependent origination, you can come to the conclusion that things do not exist the way they appear. So that's kind of an aspect we should come to a conclusion at. And then by the power of this reasoning that things are in the nature of dependence, we see that it lacks inherent existence. It lacks intrinsic existence. It lacks existing from its own side. So that lacking or the absence of intrinsic existence or inherent existence, the lack or the absence of that is what we call emptiness, right? So in order to realize emptiness, you have to depend on various reasons. And one of the, what we call in Buddhist epistemology of the middle way schools, is the reasoning, what we call dependent origination, is the king of reasonings. And why is it king of reasonings? Because it's a very kind of sophisticated form of reasoning that has various levels, right? And not only has various levels, but also it prevents you from not falling into extremes and not falling into two extremes, so to say. And what are the two extremes of eternalism, thinking that everything exists from its own side, or you could say intrinsic existence, the extreme of intrinsic nature. So if you understand dependent origination, you don't fall into that extreme, because you see everything is dependent, so nothing can exist from its own side. That's one extreme. The other extreme is nihilism, right? That you might fall to the extreme if you think about emptiness, that nothing exists at all, and that is completely wrong. Yeah, so emptiness doesn't mean nothing exists at all. Emptiness means that something is empty of something, but there is an existence there. Yeah, so by dependent, the first syllable in dependent origination or dependent arising, however you like to translate it, the term Tenzin in Tibetan. So ten or dependent, yeah, is a kind of aspect, what we call, because of things are in the nature of dependence, that's why things do not exist from their own side. Yeah, so by understanding dependence, you do not fall into the extreme of eternalism, or you fall in the extreme of inherent existence, because you know things are dependent. So you know things do not exist from their own side. Things are dependent on something else than itself. If things are depending on something else than itself, that means that nothing can exist in and by itself. Yeah? So the first term, dependent, helps us not to fall into that extreme of eternalism or the extreme of inherent existence, so to say. Dependent origination, the second term, origination, helps us not to fall into the extreme of nihilism, right? That because things on a conventional level, things originate. And because things on a conventional level originate, that means that things exist. Yeah, our body exists, our mind exists, that's a reality. But the thing is, we superimpose something on top of that body and the mind that does not exist. And that's what we're refuting, right? We don't refute the body, we don't refute the mind, but we refute a kind of intrinsic self that seems to appear on top of your body and your mind. Yeah? So that's what we're refuting. Yeah, so that's very important to understand. And to refute that, we use the reasoning dependent origination. And that's there's many other reasonings, but that's the one we're gonna focus upon today. Yeah. Because that's the text we plan to go over. Hymn to the Buddha, World Transcendent. Yeah, the text by Arya Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna wrote many texts on this topic, because, as you know, yeah, so maybe first finish that quotation we started with. Yeah, so you moved out of compassion, right? The motivation of the Buddha. You eliminate wrong views, and in particular, the wrong view of ignorance, of upholding or apprehension of inherent existence. You remove kasa, you eliminate wrong views. You teach of the sublime Dharma. Yes, teacher of the sublime Dharma refers to the teaching of dependent origination. Yeah, to Gautam Buddha I pay homage. So that's a very interesting aspect there. Why to Gautam Buddha I pay homage for this particular purpose? Because if you really understand the suffering of samsara, and you really understand it's caused by ignorance, and then you see a methodology that helps you to eliminate ignorance, that's very profound. That's the most profound aspect of the Buddhist doctrine, so to say. Yeah, we can apply various antidotes to various afflictions like anger, practicing patience, right? And in a similar way, contentment with attachment, rejoicing in other good deeds against jealousy, yeah, seeing that you don't know that much against pride, for example. So that's every affliction has its own uncommon antidote. Yeah, but the antidote to all afflictions is emptiness. So that means that emptiness is very, very essential and very important to be realized. And in order to realize emptiness, then there's various reasons, but one of the best reasons to be used is the reason of dependent origination, as Arya Nagarjuna very much praises a lot in his text. Yeah, what we're going to talk about. Yeah, so as I said before, Arya Nagarjuna wrote many texts. Yeah, and what happened at the time of, let's say, 400 years after the Buddha's passing, then the view of the middle way school view, and in particular Prasangika view, was degenerated. You know, and in order to revive this view, then Arya Nagarjuna was predicted by the Buddha himself, right? So that Arya Nagarjuna came to clarify this view again. And for that purpose, he wrote many texts. Yeah, the most famous one is A Fundamental Wisdom, as you probably know, by Arya Nagarjuna. And there's 5 other texts based on logic and reasoning. So there's a collection of 6 texts based on reasoning. And then 1 text is then based on the scriptural reference, the compendium of the sutras, for example, that Arya Nagarjuna proves that all is 6 texts on logic and reasoning proving emptiness, so to say, are not his own kind of made-up thing. In this text on the compendium of the sutras, then Nagarjuna proves that it all comes from the perfection of wisdom sutras, right? And Prajaparamita sutras of the Buddha. And if you read those Prajaparamita sutras, it's not easy. If you just read no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, as we just read in the Heart Sutra, then it's easy to get misunderstandings. Yeah, so you really have to understand, what do those negatives mean? No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, right? So it means there is no I from the point of view, no inherent I. Yeah, so there are no inherent aspects of intrinsic aspects in any phenomena, right? So that's kind of it's kind of, yeah, not that straightforward if you read the sutra. So that's one of the reasons why Nagarjuna clarified those teachings. And then there's also another collection of texts of advice, like, for example, the letter for a friend, as you might have read by Nagarjuna, this kind of Lamrim advice, or the commentary on Bodhicitta, for example, right? This kind of practical Lamrim style texts. Yeah, we often say that Atisha is a trailblazer of the Lamrim, but also Arya Nagarjuna wrote already about the Lamrim, not in great detail, but in these few texts. And then a third kind of collection of texts are the praises. Yeah, Arya Nagarjuna wrote many forms of homage or praise in various aspects, you know, of praising, of honoring sentient beings, for example, praising the Vajra mind, for example, is kind of Mahamudra style based text, and then also the text we go over today, the Buddha, the World Transcendent. Yeah. So yeah. So maybe I believe you all have the text, right? So then we maybe not memorize, but joking. Yeah. In the monastery we always memorize things quite a lot. But yeah, in the West, it's not really a part of the tradition, so to say. But yeah, okay. So let's go to look at the text of hymn or praise to the Buddha or the World Transcendent. So first, there is a kind of a praise in the sense that the Arya Nagarjuna is praising Manjushri, right? So homage to Manjushri, meaning Manjughosha is the Buddha of wisdom, as we know. Yeah. So, and the Buddha of wisdom is needed to depend upon if you want to realize emptiness. Yeah. Also Arya, because Lama Tsongkhapa was also very Lama Tsongkhapa himself also very much depending on Arya Manjushri. Yeah. And there's many other. Chandakirti also, as you know, Chandakirti, the great master of the middle way philosophy, and in particular the Prasangika. That Chandakirti's works are very special. Why? Because it clarifies the different schools in Buddhist philosophy. Yeah, so that's that we cannot see directly in Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, but Chandakirti was capable of that. So Chandakirti also depended on the deity Manjushri. Yeah, as you know, Chandagoman was kind of a layperson in the monastery of Nalanda, and Chandagoman was also a great scholar. And then Chandagoman was planning to debate with Chandakirti at one point of time. And then he did very well, so to say, because he was depending on Avalokitesvara, right? And Avalokitesvara told Chandagoman, if Chandakirti says this, you answer that. If Chandakirti gives this reply, you give that reply. Yeah, so because of course Avalokitesvara knew exactly what Chandakirti was going to say. Avalokitesvara is a Buddha of compassion, but yeah, also have an all-knowing mind. And Chandakirti was quite impressed, you know. And then Chandakirti was actually asking Avalokitesvara to help. And then Avalokitesvara said, no need, because you already depend on Manjushri, right? So anyway, it's kind of in various masters of the past, and we depend on particular deities, so to say, for blessings or inspiration, or and Manjushri is in particular aspect of wisdom, as His Holiness Dalai Lama says recently when he gave the Manjushri subsequent permission, what is it, a few weeks ago, Then he also said from very young age, he was already reciting Arya mantra, and it brings great benefit to the mind to bring kind of, wisdom to the mind. Yeah, because wisdom we really need sometimes, especially with emptiness. Emptiness is not an easy topic, and sometimes people fall asleep or walk away or getting distracted. That happens quite often when you talk about emptiness, right? Yeah. So if you have some wisdom or the blessing of Manjushri, then it becomes a little bit less difficult, I should say. Yeah, but emptiness takes a few decades to get into the system of the mind, and then slowly you get used to understanding those aspects. Okay, so let's go to the text. Yeah, so homage to Manjushri. Then the first verse talks about you, already a very similar verse as I just quoted from the fundamental wisdom. Then here it says, about to you, the world transcendent. You are versed in the agnosis of absence. Yeah, so that refers to emptiness, the wisdom of wisdom realizing emptiness. Yeah. For the benefit of the world, you have suffered along with great compassion. So in a similar way, as we just talked about, the Buddha, of course, doesn't suffer, but is moved out of compassion. Yeah, so that by the power of compassion, all the bodhisattvas strive for enlightenment and undergo various forms of hardships and difficulties. Yeah, so that's also true for the Buddha, of course. There's no suffering in the mind of a Buddha, but it's here being explained from the point of view of hardships and for the benefit of helping others. Yeah. So then the second verse, it says that apart from the mere aggregates, no sentient beings exist. You see, we just talked about the view of the transitory collection. Yeah, there's a body and there's a mind. Yeah, and they are momentary changing aspects of reality. And separate from the body and the mind, there is no really from its own side existing self to be found, right? Yeah, so that's kind of, we think it exists because that's the way it appears, right? When strong emotions of anger or attachment arises, or when you're close to death, yeah, that we just discussed, then there's this very strong sense of a self that arises, strong sense of an I, yeah, and a strong sense of a mind. But that, if you analyze, you cannot really find it, right? So that is not a reality, that self that appears to exist in an independent way. Yeah, that doesn't really seems to be possible. Yeah, so that's what it says here. Apart from the mere aggregates, or apart from the mere body and mind, there is nothing else. But we think there is something else. Yeah? Same with the screen you're looking at a moment. It looks very solid out there, separate from your consciousness, existing all by itself. But for the screen to come into existence, there are various things needed to come to existence, and it's also momentary changing. So that means that there's a mere collection of aspects that makes your computer a computer, right? But there's nothing else in that. Yeah. So in a similar way, our body and mind exist. There's a mere collection of those two, but we then superimpose, or we put something on top of that, of an I and mine. And that's what we refute. That does not exist. Yeah, that superimposition or thinking there is a kind of an intrinsic nature on top of the body and the mind. That's what we refute. Yeah, so that's what it says here. Apart from the mere aggregates. So it says mere aggregates, right? So mere in the sense of nothing else than that. Yeah, so mere is we come to that later, is a kind of a very interesting term, that only this and nothing else. Yeah, so it means only the collection of the momentary changing body and the mind, and there's nothing on top of that. There's no real kind of independent I on top of that. So that's what we say. Apart from the mere aggregates, no sentient beings exist. That means there are no sentient beings existing from their own side, separate from the mere collection, yeah, or that's completely distinct from the mere collection, or superimposed upon the mere collection. Yeah, so you uphold, as the Buddha explained, right? Yet the great sage, you continue to remain perfect, immersed in the welfare of beings. So that verse talks about a few aspects, yeah, a few aspects of dependence, and a few aspects of the lack of inherent existence, yeah. So it talks about the two truths, basically. The ultimate truth of things are empty of inherent existence, and the conventional truth that things conventionally exist. Yeah, there is a body and a mind, and that is a conventional reality. Your body exists, your mind exists, and both of them are momentarily changing, and both of them have various parts and a collection of parts, you know. So various parts and a collection of parts, that's also a very important aspect of dependence, yeah? Because next to the momentary changing nature of our body and the mind, there's also various parts and a collection of parts within the body and within the mind, as we already discussed. Yeah, so that maybe that brings us to the three levels of dependent origination. Yeah, normally we talk about three different levels of dependent origination within the middle way schools of Buddhist philosophy. Yeah, other schools have slightly different interpretations with regards to dependent origination, but dependent origination in the middle way philosophy is specific, like in a threefold division of dependence or dependent origination. So the first level of dependent origination is cause and effect relationships. That our body and our mind are related in the aspect of cause and effect relations. Yeah, we look at the screen, we listen to the sound, we think about what we hear, we write things down. There's a cause and effect relationship of the body and the mind, right? Or you put food inside your body and things come out, right? That's also an aspect of cause and effect relationships, right? And then various forms of perception. There's an object and that generates a kind of consciousness. After that, a feeling arises, or with it, a feeling arises. There's a conceptuality around it. I like this, I do not like this. It's constant cause and effect relationships. Yeah. In our body, same thing. The breathing aspect, the heartbeat, moving, sitting, standing up, walking, laying down, is a constant cause and effect relationship. In the body, also the various blood being pumped around and the various aspects in the neurons and in the various organs is a constant cause and effect relationship, right? So this is the first level of dependent origination. And also outside we have seeds, and that seeds grow into sprouts and grows into plants. Yeah, there's also cause and effect relationship. So this is the first level of dependence or dependent origination, so to say. That proves that things do not exist from their own side. Because things are cause and effect related, that means nothing can exist in and by themselves. Everything comes, in particular impermanent phenomena here, come into existence by the power of cause and effect relationships, right? That you know, if you put a seed on the table, nothing will happen. But if you put it in the soil with some fertilization, heat, and moisture, it will grow into a plant, right? So there's a cause and effect relationship. So the seed cannot exist in and by itself. And the seed is in the nature of dependence, because as soon as it meets conditions, it grows into something else, right? So nothing exists from its own side. And that's true for our body, does not exist in its own side because of nature of dependence, of cause and effect relationship. That's true for our mind. We're very active with our mind. There's not even 1 second without mental activity, right? So that means the cause and effect relationship in body and the mind is pretty clear. And that's actually the first level of dependent origination that proves there is no intrinsic person there. There is no from its own side existing I to be found in this process of cause and effect relationships in your body and cause and relationships in your mind, right? And the combination of those two. There's no from its own side existing entity to be found, or it's not possible to have a from its own side existing entity within this collection of cause and effect relationships. So that's the first level of dependent origination that proves emptiness, in the sense, because your body and your mind are momentarily changing, they depend on cause and effect relationships. That's exactly why there is no intrinsic self within the body and in the mind. It doesn't fit in this reality of cause and effect relationship. So that proves that the first level of dependent origination proves that from the causality, there is no from its own side existing entity of a self or mind to be found. Yeah, so there's the first level of dependent origination. The second level of dependent origination is the level of parts and a collection of parts. Yeah, so that's also true if you refer to your own body and your mind, that your body is made up of various parts, right? Bones, muscles, vessels, meat, organs, skin, so many different parts in the body. If you, for example, scan, and that's very strongly emphasized in the 4 close placements of mindfulness, for example, right? If you scan your body from the tip of your toe very slowly through your ankles, lower legs, upper legs, and lower part of the body, not only the skin, but what's inside the body as well. And then you go up to the crown of your head and you do that back and forth for a few times. You get an idea what actually is the body. Yeah? Because often we look to the body and we see the outside and then we think, oh, that's my body, but there's much more going on, right? So if you do this aspect of scanning the body and you do that over a prolonged period of time, you get a very clear and first-hand experience of what the body actually is. Yeah. If you have this first-hand experience of what the body actually is, the stronger your experience is, the stronger you see there is no intrinsic self or entity. Something exists from its own side. I cannot find anywhere in this body. Yeah, so that's kind of the reason being the various parts and a collection of all those parts. There's no solid entity to be found in the individual parts. There's no solid entity to be found in the collection of those individual parts, right? So that helps us to see that the more you understand the dependent origination of parts and a collection of parts, gives you the reason or gives you the proof, or correctly we say technically gives you the sign that proves that there is no real from its own side existing I to be found in this collection and in the individual parts. Yeah, so there's a second level of dependent origination of the dependence on parts and a collection of parts. That's also true for the mind. Yeah, we have various types of consciousness. We have sensory perception, 5 sensory perceptions. We have mental consciousness. We have like various mental factors, main minds. We have moments of consciousness. We have subtler forms of consciousness, coarser forms of consciousness. In that collection of the various parts of the consciousness itself, there's also no real entity to be found existing from its own side. And so there also with consciousness, the same logic applies, that if you really observe consciousness in a similar way as you do with a body scan, you just observe consciousness for a prolonged period of time and see what you hear, what you see, how you think about it, how you have a feeling with it, how you react to that feeling. Yeah, so there's various moments of consciousness which you could subdivide in individual parts, right? Over time, different types of consciousness. And the more you're aware of what consciousness actually is, the conventional nature of consciousness, then you actually see there is no possibility for an intrinsic self or intrinsic I anywhere in this collection of moments or this collection of various types of consciousness, being a constant process. Yeah? So there's a second level of dependent origination, of dependence on individual parts and a collection of parts that doesn't really, that insight we get helps us to see there is no entity existing from its own side to be found anywhere in your body or anywhere in your mind, by depending on cause and effect relationships and by depending on parts and a collection of parts. Yeah, so there's a second level of dependent origination, parts and a collection of parts. The third level is a little bit more challenging. Yeah, the third level, that needs a little bit more work, so to say. Yeah, so that's why I'm drinking something extra before we do that. Okay. Because the third level, it sounds, from a philosophical point of view, it sounds quite straightforward, but to really contemplate and analyze it, it's a little bit more complex. Yeah, it's kind of what we call the third level is the mere imputation or merely imputed by the mind. Yeah, so, or merely labeled by the mind, as we sometimes say. Yeah, so that's a very tricky one, and it's not an easy one to be understood. Yeah, so it's a very subtle form of conventional reality. The first 2 levels are more easier understandable forms of conventional reality, but this third one is a little bit more difficult to understand. So what does that mean? merely imputed by the mind. You know, that our body and the mind, they basically in the same nature of being merely imputed. Yeah, there's, like, if you think about consciousness, the stream of consciousness, for example, you know, there's various moments from the moment you woke up this morning until the present. There's various moments of consciousness. So where is consciousness then? You know, you say consciousness is just, we say, what is consciousness? It's just this mere collection that we label consciousness. There's nothing else, right? So there's no real consciousness to be pinpointed, or there's no body to be pinpointed. So body is a little bit more coarse, right? Consciousness is much more fluctuating, so it's easier to relate to consciousness that is just a moment, it's this collection of various moments rather than a solid entity. Yeah. So that's also true for our body. If you know that, you know, you look at a picture when you were 16, and then you look in the mirror and you see there's a difference, yeah, especially when you start to get gray hair, then there's a big difference there. Yeah. And then your gums are drawing and your hairline redrawing, and then you know there's a difference there, right? So that difference luckily didn't happen overnight, because otherwise it would be quite a shock. Yeah, but it happens over a prolonged period of time, and it means year by year, month by month, week by week, day by day, minute by hour, minute by minute, second by second, split second by split second, and then you can go in infinite subdivisions of the seconds, right? That's that you come to 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 or a million of a second. There's no end to subdivision. Of course, there is a limitation to measurement of it, but if you have a thought experiment with these things, you can go in infinite number, right? So that means that also your body is kind of, in that way, is just a constant flux of change, right? So what actually is your body is just a mere collection over time, you know, that we say, that is my body, you know. And that's even more true for what we call the person. The person is a more clear example of an imputed phenomenon. What is a person? You know, a person is just a name, a label on top of the mere collection of your body and your mind, right? Nothing else. Or another example I find quite helpful, if you think about you sitting somewhere, I don't know, I haven't been to the US, but there's mountains there with lakes, right? So you think about, I always use an example in the Alps here, but in the US you have similar things, right? So a mountain lake, and then there's morning, summer, and beautiful still weather, and you see everything reflects in the lake, right? So, and then before the lake comes into existence, there's a little stream or a river, so to say. Yeah? And that river comes from little streams, and those little streams comes from melting snow, you know. So if you have that kind of picture in front of yourself, and then you imagine you're sitting just where the river becomes the lake. Yeah, there's a kind of a water stream, let's say 2 meters wide or 3 meters wide, beautiful, looking through water, and then it becomes a lake, right? So then what is actually the river? Is a very interesting aspect. You know, you cannot really say with you and pinpoint with your finger, this is the river, because the moment you pinpoint, then that water mass you're pinpointing is already a part of the lake and is not considered a river anymore, right? So a river is just, it's there, there's water in front of us, we can see that and we can feel it, but it is not really from its own side existing river as such. Yeah, so it's a kind of, then you can see it's a kind of invitation. Yeah, there is water, but what we call river, the river itself is just an invitation based on, you could say, time and space, meaning in a particular time frame and a particular location, there is a water mass passing by from the melting of the snow, making little streams, and those little streams become a river, and the river goes into the lake. So it is just based on time and location that we say, oh, this is the river. And so there's no real entity to be found separate from that, actually. No river to be found separate from this kind of location and time, and then we say this is the river. You know, so then you can see what actually what does this merely imputed aspect actually means? Yeah, things exist being merely imputed or merely labeled, like the river, for example, and there's water, there's a conventional reality, of course. But when we see, oh wow, a river, then we grasp at that river existing, being very solid out there, but actually is not. Right? It's just a temporary thing of a particular water mass passing by at a particular time and location that we say, this is the river, nothing else. So consciousness is very similar. That the moment or the streams of moments of consciousness that passes by from the time you wake up and also in your dream, right? There's no consciousness doesn't stop. But it's just kind of, if you take a time period, then you say, okay, this is consciousness. But what is that? This is consciousness. It's just a label based on a particular period of time that there's moments of perception or there's moments of feeling. Right? There's no solid entity to be found separate from that. And so that we come to the conclusion that consciousness is in that regard merely imputed. Our body is just a process over time, and then what we call a body is just a temporary label based on a particular time frame. Yeah, so that's kind of what we can, that can help us to understand a little bit more what this third level of dependent origination actually means, merely imputed by the mind. Because if things are merely imputed by the mind, that also indicates that things do not exist from their own side. The river doesn't exist from its own side. It's moving by. Water mass is moving by. There is no solid entity existing all the time in a particular way we call river. There's the same true for our body, the same true for our mind. So we come to the conclusion that things are merely imputed, and because things are merely imputed, that's why things cannot exist from their own side. So that's kind of the three levels of dependent origination of cause and effect relationships, parts and a collection of parts, and this third level of being merely imputed by the mind. So yeah, merely imputed by the mind, that needs some space in the mind, maybe, I was thinking. So maybe we have 10 minutes break or not? And then the questions we do after the second session. So 10 minutes break, is that enough for you just to?
Yes, Geshe.
Stretch your
Back in
legs?
10 minutes, yeah. So
Yeah.
for those of us on the East Coast, 11:16. We'll come back.
11:16, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe.
Very precise. Yeah, okay, thank you. See you. Let's see. Yeah, all still there. Nobody died. All right. Yeah, so then, yeah, before we start, just make sure we have the correct motivation for this session. All right, so then, yeah. Yeah, so that means we discussed the three levels of dependent origination, right? In order to use that as an aspect of proving that there is no intrinsic nature anywhere, or there's no from its own side existing entity or self or I, right? So that's the three levels of dependent origination helps us to prove the aspect of being empty of inherent existence. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. And yeah, in verse number 2, there's a very similar verse as for those who really are the study types, so to say. Verse number 2 is very similar to one verse in the Fundamental Wisdom, and well, the 22nd chapter in the Fundamental Wisdom, that His Holiness Dalai Lama uses that verse quite often, that neither the aggregates nor different, neither the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. The Buddha doesn't depend on the aggregates, nor is the Buddha dependent on them, or the aggregates don't depend on the Buddha inherently, and neither are the aggregates depending inherently on the Buddha, and neither is the Buddha in an inherent way depending on the aggregates. Yeah, that's kind of a verse that actually explains that there is no inherent aspects of reality. Yeah, so you could put your own name in that way also forward, that you're not the individual aggregates, and then you not, meaning this inherent I, right? So that's very important to join, as we call it, to join the object of refutation with the search. Yeah, so when we look and we see, oh, I'm not in my body, oh, I'm not in my mind, so what I are we refuting is very important, right? There is a mere person is there, and the mere person exists. That we're not refuting, but the inherent aspect, the intrinsic I, or the intrinsic me or mine, and that's what we're refuting, right? So that's very important. To when we cite the Heart Sutra, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, and mind. There is a body, there is a mind, and we know that if you bump your heads against the wall, then you know there is something substantial there, right? But what we are refuting is no inherent body and no inherent mind and no inherent self. Yeah, so that's very important to know that distinction, because in verse number 2 it says that apart from the mere aggregates, yeah, so that talks about conventional reality that exists. The mere aggregates, the mere body and mind exist, right? So that it says no sentient beings exist, in the sense no inherent sentient beings separate from the mere collection of the body and the mind. Yeah, so that doesn't exist, right? That something completely separate from the mere collection existing from their own side, yeah, that does not exist. That's what we're refuting, right? No sentient beings exist means no inherent or no intrinsic sentient beings separate from the mere body and the mind. Yeah, so that's what we're saying. That's what our Nagarjuna says. That's the Buddha is saying. Yeah, you uphold. Yeah, so it's all referring to the Buddha's teachings on dependent origination and emptiness. Yet the great sage you continue to remain. That means it's very interesting. We just talked about that dependent origination proves emptiness, and emptiness proves dependent origination. Because things are empty of inherent existence, or because things are lacking intrinsic nature, that's why dependence is possible. If things all exist from their own side, then dependence is not possible, right? Yeah, so it's kind of what we say, the two sides of a coin. Emptiness proves dependent origination, and dependent origination proves emptiness. Yeah, so that's kind of a few aspects. And then yet, in line number 3, it says, yet, great sage, you continue to remain. That means the conventional reality exists, right? That the Buddha exists, we exist. Yeah, so that is kind of a very specific aspect, that you don't fall into the extreme of nihilism, as we just talked about, by dependent origination. Yeah, the reason of dependent origination. So that's why it says in line number 3 that yet, the great sage, the Buddha, you continue to remain, you exist on a conventional level, right? Yeah. Perfectly immersed in the welfare of sentient beings. Yeah? That's why the Buddha can engage in the welfare of sentient beings, because conventionally the Buddha exists. Yeah, there's no inherent Buddha, there's no from its own side existing Buddha, but there is a conventional, merely imputed Buddha that exists. There's a conventional Buddha's body, there's a conventional Buddha's mind, there's conventional sentient beings, and that exists, right? Yeah. Yeah, so that's verse number 2. Then in verse number 3, it says, wise one, yeah, referring to the Buddha, you have declared to the intelligent ones. Yeah, so yeah, we can consider us as intelligent, I suppose. I mean, to come to a talk about emptiness, you have to be quite intelligent. Doesn't only mean a high IQ, right? When we say intelligent, or sometimes we translate as Wambo Mumbo means kind of, how do you call it? Yeah, it's a collection of various aspects. It's a collection of merit, it's a collection of efforts, it's a collection of understanding, of course. Because you can be very intelligent, having a high IQ, but if you lack emotional intelligence, for example, you're not very successful in life, right? If you have a high IQ, but you're lacking the merit, then emptiness will never really come to mind. So that's kind of, you need so many causes and conditions to be here, so to say, or you need so many causes and conditions to have interest in emptiness. Most people just walk away, or think you're completely crazy when you talk about it. Yeah, and that's understandable, because since beginning of this lifetime we hold on to a reality and believe that reality, and if you're gonna challenge that reality, for some people is very, very difficult, you know. That's why emptiness for some people is very difficult. So you be, in one way, you're extremely fortunate. You know that? It's very fortunate, really, to be able to listen to, discuss, think about emptiness. You know, it's a very rare, very rare. You know, yeah. So that's what it says here: intelligent ones, so to say. Yeah, or high faculties. Sometimes that's be translated. It's maybe a better translation term sometimes being used, right? Yeah, but yeah, it might be. I don't have the Tibetan straight with me here, but yeah, it might be also referring to the intelligent aspect. Yeah. So that aggregates two are comparable, yeah, to an illusion. So that means that in the commentary on this verse, then also it refers to that emptiness is there since beginner's lifetime. It's not that something became empty after you realize emptiness, because emptiness, everything has been empty of inherent existence since beginner's lifetime, right? There's no new event coming into existence the moment you realize emptiness. It's just you realize something that existed since beginner's lifetime, but unfortunately we were stuck in this misunderstanding or this ignorance in beginner's lifetime, right? So there's one aspect that's been referred here in the commentary, and then it talks about the various types of various types of illusions or like an illusion. Yeah, so it says here, to an illusion, a mirage, or a city of Gandharvas or smell eaters, and a dream. Yeah, so here there's kind of four different aspects being given. So the body is not an illusion, the mind is not an illusion. And that's very, we should make clear what it actually means here. Illusion or a mirage, or, you know, or a dream, for example. Yeah, so those three we can relate to quite well. I think illusions, you have those, I don't know if they still exist. I haven't watched TV for more than 2 or 3 decades, so I don't know what's going on these days. But in the early days, you had this kind of magicians on TV, right? Who, you know, mostly is a woman in a box, and they saw her into two, right? Or they disappear a plane, the more sophisticated aspects. Yeah, so if you see it for the first time, you think, whoa, but if you see it for the second time, you know the trick. So you see it's not a reality, although it appears real, but you know it's not a reality. That means you understand it's a trick, right? So that's kind of what we say, see it as an illusion, yeah, or see it as a dream, or same in our dreams. When you dream, the moment you're dreaming, you think it's reality, right? And when you wake up, we're still a bit shaken up sometimes, if the dream is quite intense, right? So that means that what appears to the mind we take for granted, but now it's kind of important to see it's not a reality. What is not a reality? Intrinsic nature or inherent existence. Yeah, so our body is not an illusion, our mind is not an illusion, our body is not like a dream, our mind is not like a dream, because we can experience the body and the mind. That is not an illusion. When you're sick or when you have a headache, the headache is not an illusion. That's pretty clear, right? But the inherent aspect, the solid aspect of your body, and the inherent solid aspect of your mind, and the inherent solid aspect of the headache or the sickness, that's an illusion. Nothing exists inherently. Yeah, so that's important to know, that we don't say, oh, everything is an illusion, doesn't matter whatever you do. That's kind of completely wrong, right? There's a misunderstanding of this reality. So it's important to know what is referring here, what is the meaning of an illusion or a mirage or a dream, for example. Yeah, so as a dream is at a moment that we think is a reality, while it's not, you know. A mirage, you know, I think you have the same in the US, when the sun heats up the bitumen of the road, and then you have the reflection. It looks like water from a far distance, but then the closer you get, you see actually it's not there. And that's exactly the same with emptiness. You know, initially you have this apprehension of a very solid I. The more you analyze it, the closer you get, so to say, it starts to disappear. You start to see it doesn't exist the way it appears. And only after having realized emptiness, and in particular having a direct perception of emptiness, that the illusory-like appearance will arise. Yeah, so Lama Tsongkhapa is very clear in his great exposition of the stages of the part of the Lamrim, in the inside section there's just a few paragraphs describing the real meaning of illusion. That the real illusion appearance arises after a person has a realization of emptiness. Yeah, so that's the only way, by the power of the realization of emptiness, when you come out of that meditative absorption, then things appear still very solid out there, but you straight away realize that's not a reality. So that's kind of what we call actually illusory appearances, right? Yeah. So that's kind of quite a sophisticated level of accomplishment or realization, you could say, right? But we can relate to it and think that everything around us looks very solid. The screen looks, and your body, and your mind, and the various objects in your room, but they are not that solid as they appear, right? Yeah. And we take things for granted, and then we saw with the pandemic that things are not that solid. Things are not that fixed. Everything is in the nature of dependence, right? And that's, for some people, was quite difficult to deal with that, because our habituation to permanence and our habituation to this kind of always being there is very strong, you know. So then most people couldn't believe, when I was in retreat in eastern Nepal, and during the start of the pandemic, and I knew there were a few cases before I went to retreat. I thought, oh, that will settle down. So I came out of retreat after a few weeks, and the whole world was upside down. And then they said, Namdak, you know, you cannot go back to India anymore. I said, what? How is that possible? That can't be true. So we take things for granted so much, right? Yeah. So that means that that's just with this very simple thing as a pandemic, but even much more so with inherent existence, because that habituation is there since beginning of lifetime, right? So to see it as an illusion, you can imagine it's not an easy task, you know, yeah. But you can at least relate to it, that if you have this perception of emptiness and you see everything is empty of inherent existence or intrinsic nature, when you come out of that realization, then things still appear because of previous habituation patterns, right? When you realize emptiness, only emptiness appears. But when you come out of that realization, because of the previous imprints, we are not purified yet, things still appear very solid. But just by the realization of emptiness, you say, it's just an illusion. It's not really there, the way they appear. Yeah, so that's kind of what we call illusion-like. And things are existing because your body exists, your mind exists. That's not the illusion, but the inherent appearance, that's the illusion. The intrinsic appearance, that's the illusion. So that's important to know, because there's a lot of misunderstandings regarding seeing things as an illusion or seeing things as a dream, for example, right? Yeah. So it's important to know that distinction. Yeah. Yeah. And then verse number 4 talks about a very elaborate topic in the middle way philosophy, which is often studied for several weeks in the monastic system. And here is just one verse. Yeah. So you can imagine I'm not really able to explain that in great detail, you know. Yeah. So that talks about what we call the four extremes of four extremes of arising, or the four extremes of generation, for example. Yeah. That things do not exist, or things do not arise, and it's in cause and effect relationships. It's mostly referring to a seed and a sprout, right? That nothing exists or nothing comes into being. The seed doesn't grow into a sprout from an inherent seed or inherent self, so to say. So that's the first refutation, that nothing exists is arisen from an inherent or intrinsic self. Yeah, so the self doesn't really have to refer to a person. You can also say an inherent seed, for example. When I say a seed that produces a particular sprout and a plant, yeah, that seed also, we say, that appears inherent, or your computer appears inherent, right? So there's kind of what we call the self of phenomena. It's not a person. Your computer is not a person. I mean, people might argue with me, what about IA? If IA is a person or not, has conscious or not, but I spare you that debate, right? Yeah. But the computer itself also appears very solid and inherent. Yeah? So that means there is a kind of a self, as we call it, the self of phenomena, we call that. Yeah. So there's a distinction between the self of a person and the self of phenomena. There's no concept of I as such, but the computer appears very solid out there all by itself. Yeah, so that inherent appearance of the computer, that's also what we call the self of phenomena. Yeah, so that's just a term we give to that. Yeah. So then from the point of view of the self of phenomena, then we have a seed. That seed doesn't produce a sprout or a plant by an inherent self or by inherent from its own existing seed as such, because it depends on various causes and conditions of heat, moisture, fertilization to grow into a sprout, right, and to grow into a plant. And so the first refutation is inherent from itself, you could also say. Yeah, so inherent from itself, or inherent from itself, it includes the self, right? Yeah. So nothing exists inherent from itself. That's what it means, right? Yeah. And it also, the seed doesn't grow into a sprout by depending on inherent from its own side existing conditions like water, heat, moisture, fertilization, you know, that other aspects other than the seed itself that produces the sprout, those other aspects also are in the nature of dependence. And that's exactly the only reason why it can grow into a sprout in the plant, right? So there you can say that things are empty of an inherent self, meaning the seed itself. Things are empty of an inherent other, meaning the corporate conditions. Yeah, they don't exist by their own side, or from themselves, or by themselves. Yeah, so there's the first two aspects there, self and others. Yeah, so no inherent self and no inherent other. And then the third one is very easy. You just put the first two together, you have self and others, right? So because there's no inherent self and there's no inherent others, then there's also no inherent self and others. You just put a plus between self and others, right? Yeah. And there's also nothing arising in impermanent phenomena without a cause. That's the fourth one. Yeah? So without a cause, you know, so everything in what is impermanent depends on causes and conditions and results, right? So that's kind of nothing can arise without a cause. The Big Bang, for example, is actually not a Big Bang; it's a big bounce, right? So that means that before the Big Bang came into existence, there was something causing the Big Bang coming into existence, right? Yeah. So now a lot of scientists, they move in the last decade already, they move to understand it's actually a bounce rather than a bang, right? Yeah. Something created the Big Bang, right? So something caused it to happen. So that's what we call a cause and effect relationships. Yeah? So yeah, so nothing exists in impermanent phenomena arises from itself inherently. Yeah, that's the first one, or inherent self. The other one that doesn't arise inherently depending on others, because there is no inherent dependence. Yeah? So that's the second one. And the third one is putting self and others together. And then the fourth one is without a cause. Everything is depending on causes. When we talk about impermanent phenomena, like the Big Bang, for example, was caused in order to come to existence, right? Now, in Buddhism, we don't believe in random aspects of reality. Everything is always in the nature of dependence, and there's always a cause, especially in impermanent phenomena, that things are caused by something. Yeah. Okay, so that's in verse 4 that talks about those who originate from a cause. Yeah, without that cause, they do not exist. Yeah. So why would you not uphold that clearly they are just reflections? Meaning just reflections, similar way as just an illusion. If things exist without inherent existence, then when they appear in inherent way, that's an illusion, right? So that's we just discussed in verse number 3, that things are in the nature of an illusion from the point of view of inherent appearance. Yeah. Then verse number 5, has various aspects in the commentaries of the mind-only school and also commentaries on the Kazakh from the point of view of the Prasangika school or the consequent school, right? So the various elements of earth, water, fire and wind, yeah, the 4 elements, they also depend on various causes and conditions. And in order to create a kind of perception, in order to see or the color and the shape of our screen or our computer that causes a kind of a consciousness to arise, that also depends on various causes and conditions, right? Every form of perception depends on a particular object, and that object by itself depends on various causes and conditions, and to perceive an object depends on various causes and conditions. So there also you can say, from the point of view of consciousness, yeah, if you go back to the 4 close places of mindfulness, yeah, you can check your body, you can do a scan of your body, you can do a scan of your mind and of feeling. So that helps us to understand what actually is the conventional reality of your body and your mind. And that's probably very powerful. If you do that meditation over a very long period of time, scanning your body for, let's say, 10, 20 minutes a day, your mind 10, 22 minutes a day, and then you build up a very strong habituation pattern, and if there's some concentration present, then for sure, over time, you actually start to understand what is the body and what is the mind. And then it's a perfect tool to have realized in one way, have a personal experience of dependent origination of your body and your mind, right? So then if you realize or experience this aspect of your body and your mind, then whenever the I comes up, you straight away see it cannot exist the way it appears. Because you straight away have this first-hand experience, what actually is the body, and from its own side existing I does not fit anywhere in this process of the body, and doesn't fit in the process of the mind. So it's easier to refute this inherent I, so to say. And that's also true that's true with the body and the mind. It's true with feeling, right? And it's true with phenomena. If you go to the 4 close placements of mindfulness, the 4th one is phenomena, how objects appear to the mind and how mental factors play a role. Yeah, understand that process helps us also to basically understanding that there is no inherent mind, there's no inherent object anywhere. Yeah. Because in order to perceive the screen or listen to the sound, it depends on so many causes and conditions. Right now, they have invented this software called Zoom, for example. Yeah, if they were not there, then it's very helpful software. But also that is a kind of a very complex system of various aspects. It's not that solid existing from its own side, right? And your computer also is a very complex machine, So that means it's depending on our perception of listening to what I'm saying, and the perception of seeing the image of Namdak on the screen, that depends on many causes and conditions. It's not that solid as it appears. Things appear very solid out there, but that's not a reality, right? It depends on many causes and conditions of electricity, the various chips and programs, hardware, software in the computer. So that means it appears all very solid out there, but that's not a reality, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit relation to that. Verse number 6 is very similar. That with the aspect of feeling, yeah, that we cannot prevent feeling from coming into being, right? Feeling is what we call an omnipresent mental factor. Yeah, so we have main minds and mental factors, and then sometimes we classify 51 mental factors, depends which text you depend upon. And then feeling is being classified as an omnipresent mental factor. You cannot prevent having feeling. Yeah, sometimes feeling is more dormant, other times it's more manifest. Yeah, but you cannot really prevent feeling from coming into existence. So what happens when we get a feeling of happiness, or a feeling of pleasure, or a feeling of a neutral aspect? Yeah? Those feelings often they appear very solid, in a very solid, independent way. If we have pain or something like that, it appears very independent, or a problem that arises appears very independent, meaning it appears all by itself, and that why it causes actually more suffering in that way. Yeah, because we see it as an unchanging aspect, and nothing is unchanging in feeling. Everything changes. Yeah. So same when you're down or when you're depressed, then it looks, when you're in that period, it looks like an unchangeable reality, but it's not. Yeah, that also passes by. So sometimes even feeling appears very inherent to us, or very solid to us. Well, it's not. It's just a fluctuation of various moments, right? Nothing else. And it's been triggered by a particular condition, and comes to existence and then disappears again. So the more you practice the close place mindfulness of feeling, you start to observe feeling more. If you're able to observe feeling, then as feeling we cannot prevent from coming into existence, but we can prevent, or we can control, so to say, the way we react to the feeling. So that's kind of interesting. If you play more with this, and then over time you get a first-hand experience of feeling, and then next time this feeling of unhappiness comes, or this negative feeling comes, and then you think, oh, a negative feeling, oh, a feeling of suffering. Yeah, and then you just see it's a play of the mind. It's just a momentary thing, and you don't grasp at it as a permanent from its own side existing reality. Yeah, so then it can bring great benefits if you just have a feeling. For example, you wake up with you have a pleasant dream. Actually, you want to go back to bed, but you want to dream again, but it's not possible because you have to start your day. And then you read this annoying message of a person, and your whole mind is completely gone, right? But then you can be fed up the rest of the day, or you can think, oh, this message triggered my mind. Interesting. Yeah, and then just let it go again, right? So that's kind of, if you can let go of those negative feelings, and then, of course, it's in the nature of emptiness, but just be observing it and seeing it's just in the nature of change, then can bring great benefits. That's kind of, emptiness by itself is a very sophisticated system and eliminates ignorance, but on a day-to-day life, you can have so many benefits of just observing things and do not get influenced by it. It's very interesting to have that. There was a very interesting Zen master I heard yesterday, actually, in the dialogue we had, that he was standing with a candle during the Vietnam War in front of the White House every day as a protest, rain or sun or rain, every day was there a protest. And then one of the journalists asked him, do you really think you can change the government in their view regarding the war? He says, I don't think so, but I hope they won't change what they say. They won't change. I won't change my perception. So that means that the way the world is going, that should not change our attitude, our perception. It's a very interesting comment. That because we cannot prevent to encounter difficulties in life, right? There's no way you can escape difficulties in life. But how do we deal with difficulties? That we can do a lot about. Yeah, so that's kind of Shantideva's example of, covering the whole world in leather when the whole world is filled with thorns, or cover your feet. What's easier? And covering your feet is much easier, right? So that means if you try to escape difficult people in life, then you walk around across the street, around the corner, and before you know, the similar person, or maybe even worse, it will pop up very, very soon, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what we see here in this verse number 6, that even feeling is devoid of a self. Feeling does not exist from its own side. It's just a play of the mind, right? So it's just a process. So the more you see that process, the less you grasp at it. If you grasp less at it, then with pleasant feeling, there's less attachment and desire. And with unpleasant feeling, there's less irritation. So if you just see it's a play of the mind, then that's kind of an aspect, a practical aspect, right? Yeah, of the conventional reality of things. Yeah. So that's with verse number 6. And then verse number 7 it talks about, things are labeled by the mind, and things have a meaning, so to say. Here it's been called the term referent, word and referent, but referent can also refer to the meaning of things. So whatever we call things, whatever is the meaning of things, there's also an interconnectedness between those two, right? The words do not exist by themselves, the meaning do not exist by themselves, right? Yeah. And that's also in verse 8, very similar. The agent, so to say, and the action. So the agent, if we engage in a particular action, then the agent is depending on the action, and the action is dependent on the agent. There's no two individual aspects, so to say, of an autonomous action and an autonomous kind of agent, or from its own side existing agent and from its own side existing action. So everything we do and we engage in is kind of depending on so many causes and conditions. And there's a similar also in verse number 9 that, there's nothing beyond dependence. We talked about the 3 levels of dependence. So all phenomena are depending, in various ways on those 3 levels. All impermanent phenomena, for example, they depend on the first level of cause and effect relationships, right? All permanent phenomena depends on the second 2. 2 aspects of parts and collection of parts, as well as merely imputed. But also, of course, impermanent phenomena also depends on being merely imputed, right? So all phenomena basically are in one or the other way depending on or related to those 3 levels of dependent origination, right? So that's also true for the agent and the action. So the many verbs are very similar, and we don't have that much time. But I think the most important aspect, what we have to try to get at in today is these various levels of dependent origination, right? And then you can relate it to the various verses, because verse 10, 11, and 12 talks about the various levels of dependent origination as well, in relation with consciousness, as we just talked about, right? The knower and the known, or the observer and the observed. So that's a very interesting aspects. Even in quantum mechanics, as there's no observed without an observer, right? So that's kind of very interesting aspects of the correlation between an observer and observed, or objects and consciousness. And neither of those 2 exist from their own side, right? There's no from its own side existing observed and outside existing observer, right? What is being observed depends on the observer, and the observer depends on what's being observed, right? So that's kind of a two-way traffic of dependence is there, So there's a few more aspects in verse 11 and 12, but then we have to go to another level of the various schools of the middle way, and we have only a certain amount of time today. So for the time being, just mainly focused upon the consequent school, right, of the 3 levels of dependent origination. And because of that 3 levels of dependent origination, that helps us also to understand the various ways of things are empty of inherent nature, or empty of intrinsic existence, right? So that's kind of the reasons we apply to that. Then verse number 13 is more or less a repetition or similar aspects of those 4 extreme forms of production, as we talked about in verse number, verse number 4? That's correct. So verse number 13 is very similar to verse number 4, that things do not exist from itself, things do not exist from other, from something else, inherent existing other, and things do not exist from inherent existing both, or things do not exist in an impermanent phenomenon from no cause at all. Then there's 3 verses, 14, 15, and 16, which by itself needs another few hours, but because that talks about a very complex topic in the middle way school of philosophy, in a particular Prasangika school, about disintegratedness. There's a very interesting aspect in chapter 7, for example, of the fundamental wisdom, where it talks about that, what carries over, what's being carried over time, how is information carried over time, for example, with karma, with karma aspect, how does karma actually functions? In certain schools of Buddhist philosophy, we say, okay, you have an action of body, speech, and mind, or either of those 3, right? And that action comes to an end. And when it comes to an end, there is information there. And how is that information carried over time? That's a question. There's a question in biology, there's a question in quantum mechanics, there's a question in neuroscience. How do we remember things? Are very, very big questions in science. So Arya Nagarjuna is very, very interesting kind of interpretation of these points. So Arya Nagarjuna comes to this point we call disintegratedness. That means that for example, you look at the screen and you see the color and the shape of the various faces, right? Then when you close your eyes and you don't see, your eye consciousness perceiving the color and the shape cease to exist when you close your eyes. But you can still remember what you saw. You can vaguely put up a kind of mental image or meaning generality, as we say, of what you saw. So how is that possible? And that's possible by the power of having seen it with your eyes, right? Having seen the color and the shape. So that means when your eye consciousness stops perceiving the color and the shape, that there's a kind of potential there you can remember, right? Yeah, so that's been explained in various schools of Buddhist philosophy. What is this potential? Is it a seed? And where is this seed? Where is it planted? There's various schools of Buddhist philosophy who have very different interpretations about this, right? But then in the Prasangika school, and in particular Lama Tsongkhapa's interpretation, Lama Tsongkhapa says that potential is nothing more than just the disintegration of its last moment. That means when you look at a screen and you close your eyes, the last moment you saw the screen, that by itself is the potential. That by itself is a momentary changing phenomena, and that keeps changing. Yeah, so there's a kind of a potential that can be remembered. Yeah, so that's what we call disintegratedness, so to say. And because there is no from its own side existing screen, and there's no from its own side existing eye consciousness, and there's no from its own side existing potential in your mind to remember it, then you can imagine if you see this process of a perception that comes into existence, that comes to an end, and can be remembered, is a constant momentary changing nature of aspects of reality, right? So nothing exists in this kind of process in and of itself. Everything is constantly related with various aspects of reality, right? So that means there is that dependence right there. So that's kind of a few aspects of that things in an impermanent reality are very much depending on past, present, and future, right? And very much depend on various causes and conditions. I ask you, how did the screen look like? By hearing that sound, then you generate this mental image of the screen. So that means there's constant in our consciousness, there's constant influx of coming and going, of moments of consciousness and perception that is caused by various forms of triggered by various causes and conditions. Yeah? So nothing exists really in and by itself. Everything is constantly depending on other things than itself. Yeah? So that's kind of a few important aspects of those points of disintegratedness, so to say. Yeah. Then verse number 19 is also very similar again to those four extremes of production, as we talked about already in verse 4, for example. Yeah. And then, it praises the Buddha's incredible teachings over a few verses. Again, that the Buddha is kind of so kind of fearless, like a lion's roar. Is kind of because the Buddha explains these teachings on emptiness, right? Which is the ultimate reality of everything. Yeah? So that means we can relate each and every phenomenon to its emptiness in that regard. Yeah. And then it is capable to stop all suffering. Yeah? That emptiness of inherent existence is basically eliminating ignorance. Yeah? The ignorance of that side that causes us to cycle around in samsara again and again and again. So for that point of view, then Arya Nagarjuna also praises the Buddha in verse 21, that is kind of the ambrosia of emptiness, or the supreme nectar of emptiness, to stop this cycle of conceptualizations, not just any conceptualizations, but the conceptualizations of ignorance, right? Grasping and the inherent I am I. Yeah, sorry, I'm rushing through a bit because, we don't have much time, but the main points we discussed, we can, if you really want to have a word-by-word explanation of the text, then we might need kind of quite a few sections, right? Yeah. So but then the last few verses, then it comes down again to proving emptiness with the nature or the conventional reality of dependent origination, right? As we just talked about those three levels, and whatever we engage in, and whatever we perceive, and whatever appears to the mind, whatever object that exists out there, it's all in the same nature, right? It's the conventional reality is there, and the conventional reality of dependence, and the ultimate reality is there from the point of view of empty of inherent existence. Ultimate, why? Because every phenomena is empty of inherent existence, right? So that's kind of, even emptiness itself, even the Buddha is empty of inherent existence, right? So that's kind of what we call an ultimate reality. And it's very ultimate reality because the ultimate reality itself is empty of inherent existence, right? So it's very interesting to see that aspect as well. Yeah. So that comes, the talk comes to an end. There's 1 minute left, so I think maybe important to have a few. If there's questions, then maybe it's good to have some question answer. Opportunity, possibility. That's always important to clarify. Yeah.
I think Anna had a question earlier. Anna, do you still have your question?
Hello, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not, repeating anything. I probably am. But just when we were discussing the lake and the conventional reality of the lake is water.
Yeah.
So the conventional reality of consciousness,
Mm.
is it prana, the typical colloquial name, or is it an energy that's forever changing, a frequency? So if a lake is water, then what is consciousness conventionally?
What is consciousness? It's a big question, right?
Yeah, sorry.
So that needs a whole so consciousness is being well discussed in Buddhist philosophy as well as in science, as you know, and certain scientists. When I had a dialogue with Anil Seth, for example, very interesting neuroscientist, very well-respected neuroscientist. Then in his book Being You, he is very interesting. He says, better start with a short definition rather to have a very complex definition and you have to come back to it. That's not the right one. Yeah, so start with a simple definition. So he actually describes an experience of whatever you talk about, right? So it's kind of an experience. And most neuroscientists, they agree, especially when you talk about a subjective aspect of consciousness, because consciousness is subjective, and then from a Buddhist perspective, we say clear and knowing. Clear and knowing is the definition of consciousness. So what does that mean? Clear means things can appear to consciousness. It's kind of a possibility of objects that can appear to consciousness. And another aspect of knowing, that you have the potential to know a particular object, to understand something. So it's a kind of one aspect of consciousness where you say clear and knowing. The other aspect in the Buddhist perspective, we say consciousness is not matter, it's not physical. It is different from mainstream neuroscience, and of course, although it's changing, people like David Chance, for example, one of the great philosophers in cognitive science, he actually now is challenging that view and say, maybe we should see consciousness as a primary building block, like matter, space, and time. Which is very interesting, very challenging, So in Buddhism, we talk about a dualistic aspect of mind-brain. So that the consciousness or the mind, so to say, is not physical. Consciousness is a different kind of entity or a different kind of dimension, you could say. And so it's not physical. And even in the field of the research of the near-death experience, for example, then we talk about terms like non-local consciousness. So consciousness is a non-locality. It doesn't have a particular locality because it's not matter. So then what is actually consciousness? In science, it's very difficult to pinpoint it. We can only measure its correlation with the physical world. We can measure consciousness in relation with the physical brain, but we cannot really measure consciousness itself. So that's a big challenge we're facing still. But maybe also we get closer to the reality of that aspect as well. But in Buddhism, we define all phenomena first into two: impermanent and impermanent phenomena, right? So impermanent phenomena means momentary changing phenomena, and permanent phenomena means things that do not momentarily change. So the impermanent phenomenon we subdivide into three levels of reality. Yeah, so one is matter. Yeah, so that's kind of the physical world of our body, the computer, yeah, matter. But then the second level is consciousness. And so consciousness is a different kind of dimension, you could say, which is this clear knowing aspect. Yeah. And then the third level is a very complex one, but it's a very interesting one as well. That is kind of what we call non-associated compositional factors. It's a mouthful. That means that it's not something you can explain it in a simple way. Everything that is impermanent, but it's not mind and it's not matter. There's a kind of reality of phenomena that is momentary changing, which is not mind and not matter. And that's why we call it non-associated. It's not associated with consciousness and it's not associated with matter. Yeah. So, but it is a compositional factor. That means it is an impermanent phenomena. That's what it means. Yeah. So these kind of imprints or these potentials we just talked about, we didn't go into great detail, but they fall into this category. Information that is carried over time, generally speaking, in most Buddhist schools, we can put it forward in this third group, which is very interesting. We cannot see it, we cannot hear it, we cannot feel it or touch it or smell it or taste it, but it's a reality. And even if you look into David Bohm's interpretation of reality, right? So David Bohm is a very, very interesting physicist, you know, because he was not only incredibly intelligent and incredibly good with mathematics, but also he was very open to philosophy, right? He studied with Krishnamurti, for example. And David Bohm, he talks about these hidden variables or the implicate order, right? It's very, very interesting. If you take those things into account, and then you talk about these kind of aspects of non-associated compositional factors, there seems to be quite a common ground there. How information is carried over time in biology, in quantum mechanics, in neuroscience is quite a difficult topic. Yeah? Because we cannot measure it. That's the problem. We can only measure its correlation with the physical world. Yeah? So that's why David Bohm came to this hypothesis of theory of this implicate order, so to say, right? Or the hidden variables, so to say. So it's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think I really answer your question, but at least you have something to think about it. Yeah.
There's a lot more to explore, thank you. And just a very quick one. So
Yeah.
could we access information we haven't learned physically?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. Yes. You want to hear a bit more about it? Then yes or not? Yeah.
If everyone else.
For example, take there's a kind of a phenomenon, which is a very interesting phenomenon. Dementia. I don't know if you heard about it. People who can remember every single day of their lives. Yeah. So if I ask you, I don't know how old you are, but what did you do on the 9th of July, let's say 1999? You were alive then or not? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what did you do at that time? You know, it's difficult. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, your time is, what is it? 12 or something, right? Yeah. I don't know where you are, but fine. Yeah. Ale, you in the UK? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. It looks like you have Christmas trees or something behind you.
I kind of do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that means that what did you do in 1999 on the 9th of July? You can't remember, right? I suppose. Very difficult. But there are people, there's not many, but there are people who can exactly remember. Oh, it was a Friday. Oh, it was beautiful weather. Oh, I did this, I did that. Oh, this was on the news. Every single day like that. So that means that we cannot remember, but when we cannot remember something like that, it doesn't mean that information is not available. We cannot access that information. That's the problem. But these people who have this high dementia, who can actually remember all these individual aspects of their life, that means for us that information is available, for them that information is available, but they can access it and we cannot, you see? So that means that the information, when we don't know it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So that's a very interesting form of science. And they've been researched, put them through fMRI scans. A lot of research has been done with these few individuals, but still, they're still struggling because memory in science in neuroscience is a very challenging topic, right? But yeah, that gives us a little kind of reasoning or thinking that there is information out there, or I mean, it's not local, right? So it's not really in this particular location. There is information, and you can access this information if you have the right capacities. Another aspect in the spiritual part, if you get what we call calm abiding, yeah, that means a single pointedness of mind that you can focus on an object according to your wish, which is quite a challenging one, but it's possible. People who accomplish calm abiding, they can remember things they never remembered before. For example, they get this calm abiding, then they remember all the little details of the toys they were playing with when they were children. And then they start remembering previous lifetime, then another lifetime, then another lifetime. It's very, very interesting kind of aspect of clairvoyance, right? And the more peaceful your mind is, the more kind of clarity that comes, right? That's also a very interesting aspect as well. I mean, with many types of clairvoyance that's been researched, then certain people, they use that aspect of just going down to the peaceful, quiet place in the mind, and then they can remember many more things, or can see or know things, right? Yeah. So there's a very interesting, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of scientific backup regarding that the phenomena exist, but the explanations are lacking, yeah, because it's a very, what we call in Buddhism, very hidden phenomena, and as David Bohm puts it forward, hidden variables or the implicate order. But it doesn't mean it does not exist, and its correlation with the explicit order, or its correlation with the manifest world or the physical world, we can measure certain aspects, right? So then there's kind of very interesting science happening in that field. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? You can unmute yourself or put your hand out. Nadine?
Thank you so much, dear Geshe. I would like to know, in which of his works did Lama Tsongkhapa teach this integratedness?
In his commentary on the fundamental wisdom, that's been translated in English. An Ocean of Reasoning, I think, the title. Ocean of Reasoning, and it was, this translated into English, the root text, Fundamental Wisdom, as well as Lama Tsongkhapa's Ocean of Reasoning on that particular.
Ocean of Reasoning. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's published by, I think, Snow Lion or Wisdom, either of those two. And Geshe Namdak from Varanasi, he translated that together with, I forgot.
Okay, Garfield.
Garfield, right? Yeah, yeah, okay. So yeah, that book is available.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, Geshe, may I ask just a quick question on definition? Sure. You know, you had mentioned in Tibetan, dependent origination is Tenzin. I've also heard Tendrel. I was wondering what do they point to?
Tendrel or Tendrel Jung. Sometimes you have all the 3 syllables, sometimes you have only 2, right? So sometimes you translate as dependent origination, Tenzin, or dependent arising, Tenzin, yeah, or dependent relation, Tendrel. Yeah? So the drel aspect is the relation, right? So because things are dependent and originate in independence, there's a relation there. So the relation also very interesting because Carlo Rovelli, his main kind of emphasis is on relations, right? So his theory on relations is very interesting. It's very, very close to Nagarjuna's philosophy, actually. So yeah, then the term relation in that context comes out better, right? But the meaning is the same. Yeah, that there's a relation between the 2 terms as well, right? Ten and Jung, right? So that because things are dependent, that's why things do not exist from their own side. Because there's origination, or there's what do you say, arising, that's why things do exist, and because there's a correlation between the 2, right? Yeah.
Great,
or a correlation between 2 objects or 2 aspects of time, or there's always everything. That's with relational aspect. Everything is always related with something else than itself. So that's what Carlo Rovelli in his book Helgoland, for example, clearly defines, that there is no reality beyond the concept of relation, right? The reality is just a wave of information in relationships. Yeah, there's no reality beyond relationships. Yeah, so that's Carlo Rovelli is in that regard very close to the interpretation of dependent origination. When I was asked, we had a dialogue with him. We now have put up this course, right, with Science, Wisdom, Life, the course, online course we're going to launch in the 1st of September. Yeah, so, and then offline we met also a little bit, and then Carlo Rovelli also asked me, do I really have to become a Buddhist to understand emptiness? I said, no, you don't really have to. You know, you can just examine it, right? That's very interesting. But he feels very close to Nagarjuna, because what he sees in science is very, very close to Arya Nagarjuna, and the way he describes a phenomena like a chair or something like that being merely imputed is, yeah, I said to him, you know, you almost the same way as Nagarjuna describes merely imputed nature of reality. Yeah, so it's very interesting. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Geshe. We've kept you for so much longer than the time.
Yes,
Should
no
we
problem.
do our prayers?
Yeah, sure. So maybe, I don't know, a few of you have connection Lama Zopa Rinpoche, then we can do the return prayer. And then a few dedications after. Yeah, so let's dedicate, because for a few purposes, for His Holiness Dalai Lama, long and healthy life, and for the existence of the Dharma and the two bodhicittas, that all beings may generate love and kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and also wisdom, realizing emptiness. So we dedicate for that. But also, first Lama Zopa Rinpoche is fine. But first of all, yeah, maybe that's easier. Lama Zopa Rinpoche is the founder of many centers and FPMT. And that's why it's important for us also to pray for strict return to lead sentient beings and be able to create benefits for the Dharma and the FPMT. So yeah, let's first dedicate for that, and then we do a few general dedications. Peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pacheka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and son, along with all the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands. Please bestow the virtue of goodness and accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding the spreading of Muni's precious and complete teachings to the explanation and practice, you order more of patience that has never been discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which the benefit of happiness emerged, and for the mother living beings, you certainly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of the incarnation swiftly beam the glory of the fortunate disciples. Yeah, so and then we dedication, maybe just the first page, maybe. Yeah. So His Holiness along that prayer, and then straight into the bodhicittas or the teachings first. Yeah. Dagi jin saber gewa de tendan doa gendan gambe. Keba jason lozan dabai tembe ningo rindu selje jo gare rawe korwe zengam. Pendan dewa malu chungwe. Chenre segma tenzin yaso. Shabe shi te badu tengyu ji janjo sanjo rimbo chi. Magye panan gegu chi. Keba nyamba meba yang gone gundu bewa chi. Toni tawa rimbo chi. Magye panan gegu chi. Keba nyamba meba yang gone gundu bewa chi. As long as space remains, as long as migrators remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the suffering of migrators. May the King of Dharma, Sakaba's way of Dharma practice flourish, and may the omens of obstacles be pacified, and all conditions of success be complete. To the power of having made single one request to you, Losang Drapa, may all unfortunate manifestations, degenerate age, illness, famine, quarreling, epidemic diseases, scandalous spirits, interference, and so forth be pacified, and all excellent conditions and condition creation increase. Please bless me that all my wishes be swiftly fulfilled. By evoking the power of loving kindness and compassion of Chenrezig and to the force of making extensive prayers, may all sickness, war, fighting, and famine be completely pacified, so that all beings have long, healthy, happy lives. May the glorious Guru's life be long and stable, and may all beings equal in space of happiness. And may our idols, without exception, accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may be quickly blessed to attain Buddhahood. Gewa Gunda Yanda Lama Da Dame Chegi Bella Longi Sada Langi Yunda Razoni Doje Changi Koban. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you,
inviting me.
Geshe-la.
Being a day in New York instead of boring London. Yeah.
We will see you back October 8th, Geshe-la, for your
Okay.
next class.
Yeah, same time. Yeah.
Same time. We'll send, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, and especially Geshe-la. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you,
for
Geshe La. Thank you, Sinead.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Bye bye.